All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Trevor Hertrich. It's February 19th, 2026, and we're at the Nicholson Library at Linfield University in McMinnville. Trevor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Rich. Real honor to be here.
First question is, why wine?
Oh. Why wine? It's funny, I asked that question myself a lot of other people, so tables have turned. Yeah. I think it's the, wine itself is deep, is varied, is dynamic, is historic, it is almost impossible to pin down and categorize and pen in, and that's my description, my understanding of wine, and why that's attractive to me. What about me is it satisfies? I think the baseline would be curiosity. Wanting to see a bigger picture, wanting to see multi-level, multifaceted things that sort of change depending on how you look at them, and just a curiosity, then general curiosity about the world, how there's an interaction of factors that lead to certain things happening or lead to creating certain things. So if you take, I guess I'm predisposed to that. It's like an addictive personality, predisposed to not be satisfied with one dimension of things, just genetics or personality or education or whatever, upbringing, and finding something, thankfully, relatively early on, personally and professionally, that satisfied that natural predisposition. So there's sort of like we, kind of found each other, I suppose you'd say, not for lack of trying, not for lack of there not being anything else, because wine was not a part of my upbringing. I grew up outside of Chicago, so there's this legacy of it's what my family did, and it came to me. It could have been from outer space, as far as me growing up in the Midwest. It was didn't occupy any space in my family's life, in my upbringing. Wasn't something we talked about. It wasn't something. My parents probably drank wine, but it didn't really, until it was introduced to me, and then I just kind of clicked into all these, and I think even maybe initially didn't realize it, and as you get to know more about it, you realize, it just becomes this thing that you keep wanting to learn more about, wanted to be more engaged, and then so you step back and go, why is this thing? You get asked a question in an interview, why this thing, and you think about what has led to this life and this career, centered around this, this topic, and I think that's the best, retroactive, and then I think. The other way to answer the question is more the hedonistic aspect of it. Like, what is it about wine? Not just the intellectual part that it combines history and geology and geography and meteorology and all these other things, agriculture. Just the wine itself. There's an appeal and a fascination with how this thing can transmit and can communicate a sense of place. That you can kind of describe or satisfy yourself with some intellectual explanation of, but really it's only ever going to be 90%. There's still percentage that you go, well, yeah, okay, I get that, but still there's something there. And even that's kind of an intellectual, like I said, this would be hedonistic, but even that's a little intellectual curiosity of like, okay, why does the wine taste this way or smell this way? But just the appeal of this, just the straight basic appeal of the aromas and the flavors, and how varied they are. How they're you can kind of describe them the language fails oftentimes. So it really is almost 100%, to be authentic, it's almost 100% experiential. It's 100% empirical. You can't really fully describe what it is. And there's an appeal to that. It's almost like, I don't know what it's like, maybe listening to music or something, I don't know. But yeah, that's the why. I mean, I love the way it tastes, love the way it smells. It speaks to me in a very just appealing sense, and then it also satisfies this intellectual piece as well. And the curiosity just never. The more you learn about it, the more you explore, the more you research and try to understand. It's like just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like I don't know what the analogy would be. Like iceberg would be the easy one, but it's just infinite, And that's cool too, is to embark on something that you're never going to fully understand and never really fully have complete knowledge of. Is pretty cool thing. It's like always there, right? It's always in the corner. Like you can always go back to it and learn more.
So let's talk about your life before wine a little bit. You mentioned growing up outside Chicago. Tell me about kind of early life and path into adulthood.
There wasn't a whole lot of life before wine, to be honest. I mean, I got into it through the restaurant industry, but born and raised suburb of Chicago, pretty straightforward, Midwest suburban upbringing, sports, soccer, hockey, volleyball. So not the traditional sports, but maybe for the time, maybe for that generation it was. Just always excelled in academics. Was tracked as a kid. Some I call them social experiments, but like, what do we do with the smart kids was like sort of the topic of the experiments, and there was starting in like second grade, really through high school. I don't think they ever really answered that question of how to handle in a small public school environment, how to keep kids challenged and engaged. And so had some, I don't know. I mean, I have no point of comparison, but always like in that group, right? Like in the nerd group, in the smart kids group, and the original thing was like a social isolation. Like we'll take the smart kids and we'll put them all their own classes, and there'll be very little interaction. And they realize that's probably not a good idea. So they opened that up a little bit in high school. But I mean, I graduated high school with people who I had been in class with every day, every school day, right, since I was in second grade. So 10 years of being in this tight group. And then and honestly haven't talked to any of those people since high school graduation. So draw your own conclusions there. But yeah, I said that was just the way I grew up, and ended up going to college. Didn't have like one shining thing, like this is what I want to do with my life. And or my dad said, well, you should probably go to college, because at some point in your life you're going to get to the point where there'll be a stopping point, like you can't go any further than this because you don't have a college degree. That's the way the world was back then, if you all can remember that. You're a little younger than me, so maybe you don't. But there was a time when there was that thought in your head of like, you need a college degree to get to do the things you want to do in life. So I said, okay, I should probably go to college. What do I do? And my dad said, well, find something that you're interested in, because it's going to be probably 5 years at least, and you have to be disciplined and go to class and study, and so like find something that you find interesting that will keep your attention for these 4 years or however long. And so for me, that was sociology. I actually started off out of high school, going to a community college to try and figure out what that thing was. And it turned out to be sociology. And so then I ended up going to University of Illinois, got a degree in sociology, kind of minored in psychology, which maybe two sides of the same coin, maybe like two similar coins, different denominations. But, and that's actually where I kind of, the wine journey started, honestly. So that's, if you're talking about before wine, that was up to age 18, probably, that wine wasn't a part of my life. And that was, I thought I was gonna be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be, I was that into sociology. Like this is fascinating. I want to learn as much as I can about this, and I want to share it with people. And that was my path. I thought my path was going to be was was going on in grad school and getting my doctorate and becoming a teacher. That seemed to be, of all the jobs that were possibly available to me, that was the thing that seemed like something I could do. So, like my dad said, something that would keep me getting out of bed every day, keep me, going to work. I was like, yeah, teaching seems like it. Because I think I benefited. I know I benefited, not like an epic way, but I was fortunate because maybe this program I was in as going through elementary and high school. The teachers that we had in these accelerated programs were pretty good at their jobs. They were really good teachers. So I think I maybe found some inspiration, found some admiration for the teachers I had. There's a few that stand out for different reasons. And so I think probably subconsciously I was like, yeah, I want to be that for somebody, So there's been a if we're going to talk about you fast forward this conversation to now, what I do now, this is something that's always been there in the back of my mind, of like wanting to be an educator, wanting to pay back a little bit. I think I've been fortunate to, like I said, go through this program at an early age and get really educated from people that were passionate and wanted to do it. And then also, that's the deal, right? You don't just hoard all the information for yourself and, don't share it. Like you kind of, I think if you have these experiences, having had these experiences, I feel compelled to share it with others, because if it weren't for others sharing that with me, I would have been, I wouldn't have had the opportunities I had. So that was, like I said, that was up to like junior year in college, and then that's when when wine became, entered the conversation.
So tell me about that. How did that happen?
So I was working in a restaurant, waiting tables, bartending to myself through school, and which also, by the way, you could do back in the dark ages. You could actually work and make enough money to pay tuition at a public university, and the whole story. The whole story. Working at this restaurant, been there forever. One of the nicer, like one of the few places in town with tablecloths and all that, and had been there, I'm gonna say 20, 25 years, and the wine cellar was literally a cellar, it was the basement below the restaurant, and it just, you can imagine the atrophy of 25 years of people just buying wine and putting it down in the cellar, and this mishmash of a wine list, and it was such that when you were at a table and someone ordered a bottle of wine, you were pleased because it was more money, bigger tip, but you also like died a little bit on the inside because you knew you had to go down to the basement and sort through 25 years of nonsense and stuff just being stacked randomly to find the wine. So it was like it was like, I'm going in, cover me, and your fellow waiters would watch your station until you could like come back with the wine, So that was suboptimal. And my first summer there, I played volleyball for the school, and we ran camps. And so I was there over the summer and working, pulling some shifts for the restaurant as well. And it was pretty slow during the summer, obviously college town. And I remember talking to the owner and saying, hey, listen, I'll make you a deal. I'll come in and organize this rat's cellar of wine that we have, rat's nest of wine cellar, if you feed me. Like, I don't need to work, don't put me on a schedule, I'll just come in every night, chip away at this thing, and you give me dinner, because I was broke, and it was a steakhouse, so and he was like, yeah, sure, if you want to tackle that, go for it. And then I realized I didn't know anything about wine. So I was like, shit, I now have to do this. So I went to the library and I checked out a couple books on wine, and that was it. I sat there, 3-4 nights a week for a summer, and I would like read something and be like, okay, I got this, and I'd organize the cellar, and then I'd read something else and be like, whoops. So I'd go back. So I must have reorganized that cellar, probably half a dozen times over the course of the year, but or the course of the couple months. And again, I cannot stress more strongly, this was not this was totally pragmatic. Like, I didn't want to have to deal with this cellar interrupting my shifts, and it just was like a problem that I wanted to solve for myself and my fellow workers. But then, not surprisingly, I became like the wine guy because everyone was like, well, Trevor knows where stuff is. He's the one that, you know. So then the following like 2 years of college working at this place, that was my, you know, that was my reputation. And then with that, I was like, well, I want to know when people ask questions, because that was the progression. I want to be able to answer them. Like, why is this here? Why is this that? So then I just out of this is where the curiosity starts to leak out, this natural curiosity. I'm like, well, I want to answer these questions. I don't just make stuff up. So then I kept going to the library, kept checking out more books, kept reading more about wine. Became this thing that was interesting, made work interesting, made work easier, and also, if I'm being honest, was like a nice parallel academic pursuit to my education. This is kind of in that mode, right? Learning mode. And that was it. That was kind of the beginning. So then that was, the hook was sort of set. That became my part of my personal self-image, was like, oh, I like wine. I know about wine. I'm your guy. And that continued in grad school. Went to grad school at the University of Arizona. Talked my way into a really good bartending job at a restaurant that was known for its wine program, based on the little bit that I had learned, and then realized, again, like, okay, I need to keep up with, this reputation. So that, and actually, at that stop, at that place, there was a guy studying to be a master sommelier, which was not what it is now. People were like, "You're a what? What does that mean?" And he was this really interesting little guy, kind of a hermit. But he was into two things. He was into music, like stereo, like an audiophile. He was into stereo, high-end stereo stuff, and wine. So like, we would go back to his place after a shift, and he'd just have like stacks of vinyl and these amazing, electronics, and then just stacks of wine everywhere. And so it was like, okay, this is cool. Like, again, the geekdom of it really appealed to me. Like, you can get this far into something. And yeah, so he was again, like Open was saying, like a mentor that just crossed my path. I didn't want to, and open my eyes to some of that, to an aspect of wine, again, being multifaceted, that I hadn't really considered. That, the worldliness of it, the history of it, and so then grad school abandoned, for the time, my kind of idea of becoming an academic, becoming a professor. I think I chose poorly as far as sociology. I chose because it was Arizona and it wasn't Chicago, to be honest. And there was an appeal to living in that place, but not a great program for what I wanted to do academically. So I finished, I left short of the actual master's. I was in like a fast track doctoral program to become a teacher, get my doctorate and then teach. And I left after the master's component because I just, again, for a lot of reasons, when I get into that, just wasn't, I had this idealistic idea, I think, of what, basically, like there was things about sociology that in a 4-year program, you only have enough time, like, because you're taking other classes, right? And there just was like, I felt like there were things I wanted to spend more time on, just focusing on within sociology, and I felt like I didn't have the time to do that as an undergrad. And then also, had this idea of becoming a teacher, and I thought that that's what grad school was. So you just get to study the stuff you're really into. You just get to really deep dive into a couple things, and that's not what grad school is. It's research and things like that. And I was like, So I said, chose poorly in that it wasn't, the institution was leaned in a different direction as far as their approach to social sciences, but also my own, like, that naivete of youth, of like not understanding what this was going to be. So I left there, and just, again, had a job lined up, kind of in my field, and as you do, I met a girl. And she had already signed up to do this job over the summer in Jackson, Wyoming, at a resort. She was a chef, and I said, "Oh, I got this thing. I get this job. I'm just gonna tell him you'll be there in 3 months. Come to Jackson with me. Take the summer. You're like, kind of freaked out because your whole academic thing isn't gonna work out." So I was like, "Yeah, sure." So moved to Jackson with her. She gets me in as a bartender at this resort where she's the chef. And at the end of the summer, the company comes to me, and again, context, this is like me at the restaurant in college. I didn't know a ton about wine. I knew more than I did before, but still, it's a drop in the bucket. It's always a drop in the bucket, but really a drop in the bucket at that time. But working for a resort company in Jackson, Wyoming, and this would be like the late 90s, I was like the most knowledgeable person about wine in the company probably. And they said, listen, we want to have somebody that can like oversee the wine programs of the 3 hotels and a golf club, and we think you're the guy. Would you be interested? And I remember we're sitting at one of the properties, and it's like a cathedral windows, and you're looking straight down the Tetons, and it's like fall day, the leaves are changing, and it took me about 10 seconds to say yes to that, and just like yes, I'll be your wine guy. And I don't honestly, until that moment, and maybe not even in that moment, but like until after I said yes, it honestly had not crossed my mind that this was a career possibility. Again, this was a parallel thing that kept me interested, kept me, as an undergrad, just trying to get a job done and make it easier, and it was kind of cool, and took my mind off my studies. Grad school, again, like kind of opened up. Oh yeah, but even working hanging out with this guy who was going to be a master somm, I still had a vague apprehension of what that was. So was not had not been presented to me, or had figured out that it could be an actual career. And so I left that conversation like, oh, this is what I am now. Like, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to be, they're going to pay me to do this. What else, okay. So kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there was a career possibility working with and talking about wine. Mm-hmm. So this would have been, I was 24, 25. So it really wasn't until then that I had any idea that this was something that you could do or something that I wanted to do. And then it's just, everything has kind of led from that. Worked there for a couple of years, grew tired of the isolation and all that, and strengthened my relationship with this woman at the time. So we became this tagged this dream team of chef and wine guy, and realized again we could use that to kind of our advantage, not knowing what else we were going to do. So we moved around the Mountain West for a while, worked in some really cool places. She, sharpened her skills as a chef, grew her reputation as a chef. Again, every stop and every place we go, I'm like studying more, getting into the Court of Master Sommeliers program to learn more. Like, okay, and always just feeling the obligation to do that because I had made a promise to people. I had made a promise, like, okay, yeah, I'll be your wine guy. Oh, you want to turn your program into this or that other thing? You want to strengthen? Okay. Like, this is my job. My job is to know these things. My job is to be good at this. My job is, and then also to be able to communicate it to people. So that was always just my motivation, was driven professionally, but then also, like I said at the beginning, kind of fulfilling this predisposition of curiosity for me. It didn't seem like a chore. It was actually enjoyable to me to So that went on. Let me stop there because you asked what my life was like before wine, and now we're into like my life in wine. So
you can just keep on going. I have questions, but we'll come back to them. So you just keep on going.
Yeah. So we'll wrap this part up. So worked in the hospitality sector, working with wine, multiple places over the next, let's say, 10 years, and finally, I think kind of got as far as I could get or wanted to get in that sector. And again, not having, kind of like we were talking about before we started the interview, just no awareness of the industry. Just like, oh, this is restaurants have a guy that does the wine, this is what I do. And after 10 years of 6-day, 12-hour days, 6-day weeks, I was like, yeah, what else? There's got to be something else. What else is there? And also, like, I remember going to a conference quartermaster sommeliers thing, and going to a conference with them and being like, the people here, they're not into wine for the same reasons I'm into wine. There's no value judgment there. People get into wine for different reasons. They follow different career paths. I realized that because I'd learned more. I'd like, the end all, when I started, that was the end all be all. This is a mark of like mastery, right? And this is what you do. You master wine. And I remember having that revelation that, no, this is not what I'm into. Maybe it was, but not anymore. And I think there's more to it, and I want to figure out what that is. So, yeah, so was able to transition out of that industry, the hospitality sector, into retail for a little bit. When we talk about like at least to go, like the hours and the grind of the restaurant business, I decided wasn't for me. Retail was great because it exposed me to like, oh, and I'd worked with reps before, but like, oh, there's reps and there's sales managers and there's importers and there's like all the stuff that I'd kind of vaguely associated with as a buyer in restaurants. Opening retail locations, you get really like the business of it. Like you really start to understand like when you're building, and maybe it was like building something from scratch because I kind of moved in and inherited these programs and just like kept them rolling, and you did what with the guy before you did. But the retail sector is where I've really, the broad expanse of the industry was revealed to me, and I was like, oh, you can do this, you can do that. So that was good. It was a good move. It was important. And I think, led to then working in the wholesale sector, which then led to working in the import sector. And then working in imports, you work more closely with the producers. And coincidentally, that's kind of where my academic journey was going. I'd gone through like the court and the Society of Wine Educators and WSET. Had begun WSET at that point, which are all great programs in their own ways. But working with the producers as an importer, working for an import company, and really like the crystallization of what I said at the beginning, what was appealing to me about wine is like, oh, this is the real. This is where it's the dirt, and it's the sun and the rain, and this is the gap. Right? This is the thing I could tell you, I could talk about the qualities of the wine. I could talk about vintages versus vintage, all the things you do when you're in retail and restaurants. But I didn't understand the why of it. Why are these wines different? And that's the production side, the growing of the grapes and the making of the wine. I was missing that. So that led me to Oregon. So I was lucky enough to have met some people in the Gorge when I was out. Just visiting, probably 12 years ago now. Met some folks, a small winery in the Gorge. They needed someone that, it was interesting, like I was craving knowledge of the growing and the production, and they needed someone and that's what they did and they do and they know well, but they lacked any understanding of like the industry. Like how do we get our wines out there? How do we talk about our wines? How do we sell our wines? Should we change our label? What the prices should be? And like, well, I know that stuff because that's what I've been doing for 20 years at that point. So it was a good match. And so it satisfied my need to get closer to the dirt, my need to understand some of those things. And so that was just came along at the right time. Kind of like the retail did to transition me out of the hospitality. This was a great opportunity to do that, and I think a great place to do that because you see not just the winery I was at, but in Oregon in general, there's I think a stronger connection to those aspects of growing and producing wine that I was curious about. And then just to wrap up, since we're doing the whole history thing, that relationship dissolved with the winery during COVID. Small winery, I was the highest paid person. Doesn't take a genius to figure that out. And again, just right place, right time. A company called Naked Wines, which is a big online retailer, they were realizing that as they were growing, they were starting to bring things in-house. They'd previously outsourced marketing, web development, things like that, and they had were started by, and up to that point, pretty much populated by people from the wine industry. People who love wine were doing it. And they're like, well, it's hard to get a web dev that's a wine person, you know, or hard to get a retention specialist, you know, email that's a wine person. But we can hire those people that are good at those things, and we can teach them about wine. Or at least teach them enough to understand it. And so they hired me to develop an education program internally to do that, so they cast a wider net, bring people in that were experts in their particular, you know, specialties, and get them up to speed to kind of at levels, you know, that match their responsibilities with the uniqueness of the wine industry, you know. And that was finally like education, you know. I'd taken the most circuitous, thank you, path to that, taking the long way around. That's how we say it where I grew up. But I still, now I found myself, okay, now I'm actually, and it was cool because previous to that, I don't know that I had anything to offer, right? Like now, because of my curiosity and the mentorship and the education I had received along the way, now I had this repository of experience and information and knowledge to share. And again, like I said, it wasn't doing me, it was doing me just fine, but it would, you know, I felt compelled to want to be able to share that with people. And that's what they told when they hired me. They said, well, let's, you know, the way people coming to us who are like, you know, educators in wine programs at universities, they've been in the industry for 20 years. Like you got to be able, like we're a for-profit retail company. You have to understand, you know, this isn't just an academic pursuit. Like you need to be able to take these things and say, connect the dots, if you will. If you're teaching, you know, teaching wine to marketing people, you have to be able to like understand what's useful to them about wine. They don't need to know about soil strata, right? They need to know about what it means, how to talk about wine, how to describe it, why do people choose the wines they choose, what does it mean to be, you know, why are European wines labeled differently, and how do we talk about that? So it was really cool. It was, like I said, it was sort of like a satisfying. Like I had no idea where this was leading. Through my path through wine, but when I got to that, I'm like, oh, this is what it was, you know, maybe not intended, and I'm not a fatalist in that respect, but like this worked out. Like I spent all this time just curiously grabbing things and picking up information, and just, you know, like a dog with a ball, and just chasing the ball, and then someone's like, okay, well, what have you learned all these years of chasing the ball? How can you help these other people? How can you help our business with these things? So that was very satisfying. And then that couple years of that, 2-3 years of that, kind of got that up and running, and met the folks at Linfield through a connection at Naked, and they were kind of in this transitional period, right, with the wine department having been established, but reaching, kind of getting, like the winery, like people started that loved wine, that knew it was important, had done all the heavy lifting of organizing it and getting it to a point, and now it's like, okay, now we need people like to get into this vehicle we built and really like see what it can do. And I feel like me joining the program roughly the same time as Maria, you know, and Robin and Jen, the whole team, was a good time. And it's again a continuation of what I do here, is a continuation of that, of like having a fairly good grasp of the academic part, but also understanding why this is important, why it's, you know, and being able to like, it's so satisfying to be able to help people that want to get kind of where I am and don't know how to get there, be like, oh, here, take this class, do this, do that. So it's it's worked out.
It's quite a path.
Yeah, right? Well, when you don't know where you're going.
This is true. I love that. I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about early. You're kind of introduced to wine, and you take over this sort of challenge, and suddenly you're the wine guy, and you're diving into the knowledge. And you talked about having kind of an innate curiosity about things, but I'm curious about in the early days of your wine education, your personal wine education, what was it about wine at the time that drew you in? Obviously, retroactively, it's easy to see how big a world it is, but when you're just diving in, it isn't that big. So what did you find exciting enough about it to just sort of keep diving and keep moving forward?
Well, I do think I had maybe not an appreciation or understanding, but an apprehension, a dim sense of how big it was. Mm-hmm. Like I said, reorganizing that, being in the cellar of that restaurant and like thinking, okay, I got this, and then realizing, oh, wait a second. Like I said, it was like the outline. It hadn't been colored in yet, but the lines were drawn of like, oh, there's different grapes. And for some reason, these grapes aren't grown everywhere. And for some reason, if they are grown places, they end up making different, the wines are different. And make kind of like, I guess that kind of answers the question of like, I knew there was something more and deeper to it. I was just starting to see the vague outlines. And yeah, that like clicked in my head of like, oh, this could be something. This could be, you could really train your curiosity on this. And then I think too, like I mentioned earlier, just the straight hedonistic, the appeal of it. Like I never was, I probably drink more beer now, than I did as a college kid, which is kind of backwards, right? That's when you're supposed to have your beer, like the gateway drug. But there was just something about and again, growing up in the Midwest, my mom was a terrible cook, and we drank milk and, fruit punch like everybody else. I didn't have like you hear about these kids whose parents took them to France and had Anthony Bourdain talks about eating oysters and that being like a crystallized. That wasn't, no, it was casseroles and, I don't pretend to come from this thing where I had this advanced palate and wine spoke to that, right? But I do recall just, being fascinated by the taste of wine, the texture of wine. Actually, if I'm being honest, and that's what we're here for, right? Scotch was the gateway to wine because we were pretentious little pricks, if you can say that, in college, and we were like, we'll go to the frat party, we're not going to drink beer. And somehow we decided Scotch was like, right? Thank you. It's ridiculous. So that we were so phony, but that was our pretentious thing, was we would bring a bottle of Scotch to a party and just be sitting there sipping our Scotch. But again, like being nerdy and being with a bunch of, I don't say that, right, clearly. But we were smart, we were all smart kids, right? And so it wasn't just like, it was like, this bottle of Scotch tastes different than the bottle of Scotch we brought to the party last year. And let's taste these two. So again, we weren't making any kind of research, but we were understanding that there was something going on there that made these things different. And let's be fair, like Scotch is an acquired taste, right? And so in acquiring that taste and actually truly beginning to enjoy it, not just faking it to be cool, or we thought it was cool, what I'm saying? So I think that was the click that triggered something in me that was like, oh, there's more to, you can enjoy this thing on multiple levels, right? You can enjoy the way it tastes. Even if you don't enjoy the way it tastes, you can enjoy, there's something about why it tastes the way it does that you can kind of enjoy that, and so that probably is what then when I started to taste wine and start to try and understand wine, and its theory and practice too, like the outlines I'm describing of like different grapes in different places, that's the theory part. But you can actually, the practices, and you taste it, you go, oh, okay. You can connect the dots, right? And it's not connecting the dots to like a recipe or a production method. It's not Pepsi and Coke, right? It's German Riesling, Australian Riesling, whatever. It's like there are fundamental, immutable reasons why those things are different. And so I remember that, if there was anything that kind of really set the hook and got me really interested in it, and it pulled me deeper into, this career from the initial start. I remember that. I remember thinking there was just this idea there was more to it, and I wanted to learn more about it.
So you've sold wine in all the ways you can sell wine. It feels like. So let's talk a little bit about each of those. Starting with hospitality. So you're learning wine, and you're the self-proclaimed or the other proclaimed wine guy at all these places. Tell me about what was important for you to tell a customer. What was important for you to tell your colleagues to tell a customer? How do you present wine? Why do people buy wine when they're buying it directly from a som or a server?
Yeah, I think I was doing this without understanding it. But my first, I resisted, and I'll go forward, then I'll back up a little bit, and this will make sense. When I was working as a som, and then also working in retail as a buyer, I resisted as strong as you can resist going into sales, being a salesperson. Is the classic, like, sales is a dirty word. Sales is, just not something I want to do. I don't want to be a salesman. And I was working in Denver, Colorado, and was approached by the owner of a wholesale distribution company, and I said, no, I don't want to be a salesperson. Like, I like your company, I like your wines. This is just not the only thing I'd be good at. I have no desire to sell anything. And the way they got me to do the job, the way they got me into it, he said, listen, we don't sell things. We provide them for people, right? And that sounds like a salesman thing to say, and it probably was. But he said, if you're working for us, and you walk into a wine shop, say, and you've got, you're there to sample them on a Chianti, and you look at the shelf, and they've got 100 Chiantis on the shelf, and you ask yourself, well, does the Chianti that I have to sell them, like, is it filling a gap? Are they missing out? Is this something that they need to have in their shop? Is their shop not succeeding at the level it could be because they don't have your Chianti? Because they have 100 Chiantis? Because if the answer is no, then walk out of the shop. He's like, you don't want to sell them. A salesman will sell them the 101st Chianti. He goes, that's not what we do. If you walk in and they've got 2 Chiantis, and you're like, hey, listen, you know what? It's a pretty popular category. This fits at a price point that you don't have, whatever. If there's something you think you can contribute, you want to form a partnership with your customers. You want to say, listen, we have things that will we honestly believe will improve your business, will improve your appeal, will improve whatever. If you can find that, then that's what you're doing. You're not selling them and he told the story about, we're going to go off on a tangent here, I apologize. But he's like the birth of salespeople, the creation of salespeople. He said, when you were, let's take a date, whatever, 1800s, pre-industrial, you needed a pair of shoes. You go down to the cobbler and you measure your foot and you tell him what you wanted and he make you a pair of shoes, and it would take 6 months. And you'd go back and you get the pair of shoes, and that was it. Those were your shoes. And then if they wore out and you needed a new sole, you got a tear, you go down, he'd fix it. Those were your shoes. You had one pair of shoes. The cobbler didn't need to market. He didn't need a person selling you shoes. You went and got shoes. That was it. He goes, Industrial Revolution, now there's 100 companies making shoes. You don't need 100 pairs of shoes. You need one pair of shoes. But these companies need to sell the shoes to stay in business. So that's where the salesperson came in. Is the salesperson would come along and convince you that for time immemorial before this, you only need one pair of shoes. Now you need 2 pairs of shoes. Now you need 3 pairs of shoes. Now you need, what I mean? That's the birth of marketing and sales. And I was like, okay. So the answer to your question is, this person just sort of crystallized this for me, put this in English and made me realize it. But I think I'd been operating in a variation of that from the beginning. Because I've been working as a som and a retail in retail for years before that. So I think that was always my approach. I was like, listen, there's nothing I'm going to, because that's how I felt. Because as a somm, people are wanting to sell you wine, and as a retail buyer. And my thought was always like, there's nothing someone can't walk in off the street, there's nothing they can say that's going to make me want what they have. Mm-hmm. Nothing they can say. My approach was always like the approach that I described. I would look at, if it's a wine list and the food, I would look at like, okay, here's the food, here's the menu. What wines complement this food? What are we doing here? And I would say, okay, this is what the wine list should be. The wine list should be things that work with that are of the place and of the style of the food. And so I would come up with, like, in my head or on paper, outline the wine list. We need this many of this wine, we need this many of this wine, and then I'll look at the prices. We need this many of this price, and I'd have it figured out. And we would need, let's say, the Pinot Noir section. We need 10 Pinot Noirs. We need 5 from Burgundy, 3 from Oregon, 2 from someplace else, and they need to be in these prices. So when I'm trying to fill those slots, I have that in mind. That's what I need. I've decided what I need on my list to represent, to be the most successful business, and to have a wine list that is most compatible with what we're doing and makes the most sense. And so if you're trying to get me to buy your wines, if it doesn't fit in a category that I don't, maybe I'm happy with the Burgundies I have, right? And you bring me another Burgundy that's just a repeat of what I have. Either I'm going to like it better than what I have, and I'm going to kick that one out and bring yours in, or I'm going to like, listen, I'm full on Burgundy. What I don't have, I need Riesling from someplace else other than Germany. So bring me that. That's what I need. So I always knew kind of knew what I needed, and that's what guided my buying decisions. And so a version of that plays out then when I'm trying to sell wine. To answer your question, when I'm working as a somm, I'm working as a retailer, having that conversation with the customer. What do you need? What is it you're looking for? What is it that because you don't know what I have. We have this huge wine list. We've got this massive store of wine. I'm not like, listen, every table is going to get this wine because if I sell this much, I'm going to get a trip to, No, that's how it works, right? It was like, what are you into? What do you like? What are you eating? How much do you want to spend? Like I had a picture in my mind of what my wine list should look like or my shelf should look like. I firmly believe that if you asked enough questions, the customer would tell you what it was that they needed. And maybe it wasn't specific, maybe they didn't have the words for it, but you figure out how to get to that point of like, and then you take, I've got that. Mm-hmm. I've got that thing that's going to satisfy what it is you're looking for, And occasionally people would be like, well, you pick, that's your job, right? Like, okay, cool. Here's the choices. Here's why I think you'd like these. Based on what you told me, you haven't really described a specific wine, but here's some things that I think are cool. Here's why I think they're cool. Caveat, you may not think they're cool. You may not, you have different tastes than me. You're coming from a different place. And so that's, that approach, I think applies to, like you said, all the different aspects of me selling wine, and has served 2 purposes. It allowed me to, sleep at night because I wasn't a salesperson, which is important, mainly. But the other piece was like, I felt like it was really making people's lives better. Mm-hmm. Really like using that knowledge and understanding in a practical way to improve. Because if you're not doing that, then you're just taking money from people, and that's not satisfying at all.
To kind of continue on that path, I'm curious about, in your perspective, from your kind of history here, what do people most respond to about a wine that you're describing? Is it the price? Is it the story? Is it the region? And how, as a wine seller, especially as a seller to customers, how do you best get other people's stories across? How do you make other people's wine stories meaningful?
Yeah, well, I think the story is everything. Obviously the price in a retail or like a restaurant environment, that's probably, if you looked at like a consumer survey, like what is your main, what is the first factor you use in deciding what to buy? Budget, right? So once you've kind of gotten past that, it's exactly that. It's the story, and the story could be. I think I have a pretty good ability to discern what story people, because there's a million stories with any wine, right? The key is figuring out what story people want to hear. They want to hear like, oh, this is the fourth generation. It's his daughter. She's the, you know what I mean. And I'm not belittling that at all. It's like, well, if it's a personal story, this is a family winery. They bought, you know, this. You tell that story and why. What is compelling about that wine? What makes that wine interesting from that perspective? If it's a more, you know, a story of the, how can I put this? Like of the region, why the region's interesting, right? If it's a story about what makes the wine, if you want to really kind of get a little bit more into the growing and the production. So this wine tastes like this because it grows. This is what the weather's like in this area. This is what the weather was like in that vintage. This is what the soil is like. This is what the winemaker does with it, you know, as far as the winemaking process. People respond to different, some people don't care about that. Some people are just you start talking about soil and regional differences and their eyes glaze over. But you talk about, you know, the winemaker's story, you know, then they respond. And sometimes vice versa, they like, and that's the thing about like being a som, is they want you to, people will they expect to get, sometimes they want all the technical stuff. They want what's the pH of this wine, right? So it's the story, but it's not the same story every time. And so the key is to listening to people, first of all, getting a sense of what story it is that's going to appeal to them. Because again, it goes back to what attracts me about wine. It's just the taste. People want to know, what's it taste like? Oh yeah, I like those tastes, right? They don't care about anything else. They want to buy independent family wine. So you tell them they want to buy organically produced wine. They want to buy, you know, they want to drink. People derive pleasure from wine in so many different ways that when they're asking you to recommend something, you have to push those buttons. You have to hit those pleasure spots. You have to understand what it is that's going to make them satisfied about that wine. They may want to drink, you know, something that satisfies their intellectual, satisfies them intellectually. That's nothing to do with the way the wine tastes, right? How else do you explain natural wine? I mean, it's funny, but I'm not kidding. Like, people, that's the craziest thing about natural wine. Again, I digress. But it's like, I don't want to call them flawed, because a flaw is an accident. But the characteristics of some wines are not aesthetically pleasing, right? But when you say, oh, but this wine was, you know, blah 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 blah, whatever it is, whatever the no SO2 or bottled before malolactic or all these different things people do, right? I know, you shudder. It makes you shudder. You get chills when you think about that. But people are like, and then they taste it, and if you didn't tell them all that, they'd be like, what is this plonk, right? But you're like, oh no, it's been, you know, carefully curated and it was on skins for 48 days, whatever it is. That's pushing that button. You're like, oh, this is so cool. This is what a wine that on skins for, yeah, no, it tastes terrible. But this is what a wine tastes like. And now I know what a wine tastes like that's been fermented on skins for 48, or macerated on skins for 48 days, or kept in a you know, whatever it is. Right? I don't want to get into it. But you know what I'm saying? Like, that's triggering some kind of pleasure response in their head. So as a salesperson, as a person that's charged with providing them a wine that's going to, you know, satisfy that pleasure, you have to be able to identify that pleasure, and they may not even know themselves. So you have to, like, again, listen. You have to have a pretty comprehensive understanding of the wine you're talking about to be able to pull something out of that, not just a wine, but all the wines. Like, okay, these are wines that taste like this. You know, you have to have a really pretty thorough grip of what you're doing to be able to respond to and provide things that are going to deliver what the customer's expectation is. I could have just said that, and you could edit the question and what I just said, and that would be the answer. It took me a while to figure it out, but that's the answer.
Way more interesting this way. I love it. Let's talk about your kind of formal education. You mentioned going through the Quartermasters, Society of Wine Educators, WSET. Tell me about those experiences for you. What were the biggest sort of takeaways for you, and what did you find, I guess, meaningful about pursuing wine education at that level?
Sure. Well, the court was the first formal education that I had, and I think it was important just for being an introduction to formal wine education. Provided some structure, but provided like some discipline. Court's very goal oriented. Like, this is what you're gonna have to do. Like, and it might be different now, but when I was in it, it was like, here's what you're gonna have to. Here's what we're gonna ask you to do. These are the questions we're gonna ask you. These are the things you're gonna have to perform. Now, go figure out how to do that, and then come back when you're ready, and we'll test you on those things. That was kind of the move there, and so that was created a discipline of like, okay, how do I develop wine tasting skills? How do I get to that point? How do I, like mapping, like understanding that, okay, well, you have to have really good, strong understanding of regions and subregions and things like, how do I get to that? How do I make that, so that was good and just sort of like on-ramp to being in some sort of formal wine education program. And then the society was great because obviously they're geared towards education. So it was not just like, you have to know all this stuff, but you have to also be able to communicate it, right? There's presentations piece of that. And I'm pretty sure they still do this, and I will say this about the society, and why I encourage people, for this one reason, if no other reason, the society, I think it's the second level, whatever, there's a certified wine educator, there's faults, tasting for faults. Are you familiar? So there are things that can go wrong when you're making wine, right? It's super important to be able to recognize those, right? And so you learn how to do that. The test is, I think there's 8 faults. So you sit down at a table and there's 9 glasses, and they use a neutral, like, jug wine, Pinot Grigio or something, and they dose 8 of the 9 with TCA and acid and Brett and all these things. And so you go through and you have to identify. First of all, to identify which wine is not faulted, which is a total. And then you have to identify what those faults are. And it's so useful, just to recognize. I think it'd be super useful if you were in a production capacity, and you're like, what the hell happened here? But it's also useful in like identifying those things and separating them from perhaps just winemaking style, aging, whatever. It's just as simple as an intellectual exercise. A lot of people, and they have a blind tasting component as well, as everyone does. But that was cool. But I think the bigger thing for society was just the emphasis on being an educator, like not just accumulating knowledge, but being able to. And then WSET takes that to the next level. That's the whole, really, when you get down to it. And that's what I try and stress to folks when talking about the program is. Its focus on it's so deliberate. It's really brilliantly structured in terms of as an instructor at level 1, you do 90% of the talking. It's a lecture, right? At level 3, the students do 75% of the talking. It's like it's not enough just to learn the things. By level 3, you're having to and that's part of the grading process, is like how well you communicate these things, and then diploma even more so. And so it's really truly it gets back to like questions you're asking, like how do you sell wine? It's a trade certification for people in the wine business of being able to do 2 things: select and price wines and assess their quality and make sure that those things align, and then also answer questions for people and help people find the wines that they're looking for. And so it's been, obviously it's provided, WSET's provided me with my current position and, influenced the last 7, 8 years of my career, but I do think it turned that light on for me as far as from an educational seeing that there was an educational path in wine of like, oh yeah, I thought I was teaching people, but actually I'm just talking in front of a group about wine. I'm not actually teaching. And so it reinforced it gave me the structure by which I could do what I was trying to do, which was take everything I had learned and give it back. WSET provides, not just as a WSET instructor, but even before I became an instructor, it really helped me develop those skills. Because I took level 3 right around the same time I started working for that wholesaler. And so it gave me those tools that helped me in that, in that segment of my career. Which I think if if I'd stayed on as a somm, I could probably say the same thing about the court. If I'd gone that path, further down that path, or stayed in that path, and continued on, and finished the program with the court, probably the same thing. I'd be like, well, I'm successful in this role because of what they gave me. So
you brought up earlier that by the time you got to the importing part of your career, that was sort of the first time you got close, sort of the production process and started to meet. Tell me about, at that point in your life, you knew a lot about wine. You'd sold a lot of wine. You learned a lot about wine. What did you know about wine making, about wine growing at that point?
The basics, the cursory stuff of like, by that point I had spent time visiting wineries, visiting wine regions, but it's like the dog and pony part of the thing. Like here's our tanks, and here's our vats, and here's, and especially not to be critical at all, but majority of that travel and that interaction with the production side had been in this country, and so there's just a different, again, no value, but just a different approach. It's wine making in this country, and I think that the grape itself, the growing of the grape, the characteristics of the region are de-emphasized in that picture, and the winemaker themselves, the production method, the agenda seems like a pejorative word, but the agenda of the producer, that's centered, and the grapes are just like the ingredient that feeds into that, and that's all I'll say about that. So that to that extent, yeah, I was pretty conversant in how the wine got from, how you get from grape to wine, and the things that happen in that process, in that journey, that affect the outcome. Had sort of a vague understanding of like, oh, well, so like, Carneros versus the coast versus Napa versus Oregon. Sort of a vague understanding of the impact and influence of region and climate, enough to be able to, someone's looking at 4 Chardonnays from California, what's the difference, why? Well, this is cooler climate from the coast, this is oak, this is not oak, things that supported kind of that level of conversation about wine, and also like I said, that hollow space under the stairs that was filled when I moved to Oregon to work for the winery is in meeting the customers, like I was saying earlier about the providing what they're looking for, right? Like I knew enough to taste the wines and recognize the differences in the wines, and put that down to environmental concerns or environmental factors and location and winemaking, but knew more about the winemaking piece of it. You know what I mean? So I was able to recognize these things and talk intelligently about them and catalog the differences in these wines, even European wines. But I don't think I really fully grasped the viticulture and enology side of it, or the viticulture side for sure. Mm-hmm. So working more closely with the importers. As an importer, we work mostly with Italian wines, a little bit of French. Again, the approach there is different. It's still, and I'm not going to say it's like artisans, working in obscurity. It's still a business, and they still do things on a large scale. and there's things that happen on large scale production in both places. But I think for me, especially the wineries we were working with, there was a place where the site was centered now. Like I said, if you centered the winery in the domestic picture, in the European picture, you were centering the site, you know? And whether or not that was, you can debate how accurately it was translated, because you're still having to make a bunch of wine and make it stable and all that. We can have those conversations, but just in the conversations around the wine and the story around the wine, the conversation was about, you know, the vineyard or the region or you know, and so so yeah, that's what was compelling to me, and that's where it filled those things in. Is that kind of lost track of the question, but
the next question is going to be about kind of getting to the gorge and then getting to the sort of seeing the production side, or being part of a production brand for the first time. Yeah. Tell me about that, and what were the things you had to learn? What were the things you were surprised by?
All right, the biggest thing I was surprised by was that, and this is kind of sums it up really, the things that I found interesting and compelling and fascinating were not the things that most people find interesting or compelling or fascinating, wine consumers. And I'll tell you why I say that, because I was excited. I had an eye towards wanting to work on the production side, work for a winery, and just had not found the right fit. You know, didn't want to go work for, again, a large scale producer that the center maybe even wasn't on the winery, right? Wasn't on the vineyards, wasn't on the winery, was on marketing and sales. Like let's be honest, that's a big chunk of the wine business. Didn't want to do that. I already discussed why I don't want to do that. So that narrows it down, right? And when the opportunity came to work for the winery I did in the Gorge, it was aligned with what I was hoping to, the things I was curious about, things I was wanting to learn, is because the Gorge is a nascent region, call it that, it's an emerging region, 46 years or so can be considered nascent, and that there isn't a prevailing set of anything. There's not a set of varieties, there's not a set of winemaking, there's not a set of anything, right? It's just a total free-for-all. And the winery that I ended up working with was one of, if not the only winery that really had gone all in on that dynamism, in that they were working with 20 different varieties in 3 different locations in the Gorge, which, if you've been to the Gorge, it could be 3 different regions entirely that are 5 miles apart, right? There's so much diversity in soil and climate and aspect. But the principal, the grower and the winemaker had said, well, listen, this is really the only responsible way to go about this, is to, we don't know, there is no history. Grapes had never, where they were planting, grapes had never been grown on those sites before. They literally pulled out pear trees from an orchard, 50-acre orchard, pulled out pear trees and planted, literally, like, to grasp any knowledge about the soil, went around and, like, with a tape measure and measured the diameter of the trunks of these pear trees to try and do, like, some map of nutrient and water availability to this. Yeah, right? I mean, it's crazy. But it's like, well, what else are you going to do? And then sort of match that. It's like, okay, well, try this. So and to credit the financial backers, the backer, who happens to be this guy's dad, he was like, yeah, go for it. It was almost patronage. Like, we're going to try this. We're going to grow a bunch of different things. Some are going to work well. Some are going to fail miserably. I can't tell you what the wines are going to be like. We're going to commit to vintage variation. So we're going to let the vintage guide the wines. If it's a warm vintage, the wines are going to be ripe and high alcohol. If it's a cold vintage, we're going to just, and we're going to kind of just try and keep our arms around it, try and keep it, Jean-Paul Brune, who's a great Beaujolais producer, he said, your job as a winemaker, he's like, imagine the wine is like a ball, and then you get a table, and the wine's a ball, and you put the ball in the middle of the table, and the table moves, and the ball starts to roll towards you at the table. You can catch the ball if it's going to fall. You can catch the ball, and you can put it back on the table, but you can't put it in the middle. That's all you can do. And that was their approach. It was like, we're going to steer these wines. They're going to be clean, but they're going to be representations of the site and of the vintage, and in 20 or 30 years, we may have whittled it down from 20 to 10 grapes, and then their kids are going to come along, or someone else is going to come along, and in 20 years they're going to whittle it down from 10 to 8. And they may never get further than that, right? Maybe there isn't a single, but that was the business model. That was the plan, right? I know, you're shaking your head. It's insane. Who does that? It's so expensive. It's so expensive. It's so hard. But like the commitment to do that, and I was like, 100%. I can support this. I will take what I've learned and what I know and what I can figure out and my energy, and I will get behind this. I will help you with this. So that was what appealed to me about it. And you can see like on multiple levels. And getting back to your second part of the question, what surprised me is I thought, and I don't think, let me stop for a second. This story was not being told. The mechanisms that exist and to someone who's not coming from the wine industry, the familiarity gap was there. The people that were, the person, what was being done by people who had a sense of business and marketing, but not, it was more like meeting the consumer preferences. It just wasn't, the story wasn't being told. The story that was being told was some sort of like version of this, almost like you go on a website builder and you just like click winery, right? And it's just like populates, and you go to IKEA and you're like, give me the winery, the wine tasting room set. That was the forward public-facing presence of this winery. It gave no indication of what was really going on, right? And I'm like, all right, scrap all that. We're going to tell the truth. We're going to tell the story. This is fascinating. People will be into this. They weren't. Some people were, but a lot of that, I think, just went over people's heads. Just like they didn't get it. And so we didn't. What we didn't see was a huge spike in sales or recognition or website views or social, all the metrics didn't really move the needle on a lot of these things. But what we did see was, and the irony is, in the 5 years I was there, we flipped from majority of our sales were to distribution, let's just say 75-25, to the same percentage the other way around. So people coming to the winery, seeing what we're doing, being like, oh, this is, okay, I get it, this is cool. You grow these grapes right here, that guy grows them, then you go out and pick them. I was like, this is the story, right? And people, so we would sell, we consciously drew back from distribution and consciously pushed, getting people to the winery, built a new winery, built a new tasting room. The winery had been separate from the vineyard sites, so now the winery was in the middle of the vineyard, and we were like taking people, walking them around, doing these sorts of things. And so that's the best way to tell that story. If you're going to tell a story about the place, you have to get people to the place, right? So that at least was satisfying, going out, because here's the thing. I realized this, being on that side now, rather than the side of the person buying. The story I was telling about this being a true representation of a site, and this site, everyone tells that story. Freaking Kendall Jackson tells that story, right? That story's not true. You can tell, but that's people that have never been to a winery, that don't ever been to a wine country. They think that's how wine is made, right? So you in the other 47 states of the country, you can tell that story because no one's ever going to come visit, right? But then I'm here telling that story and it's true, and I'm like, well, why? No, but no, really, it's true. Like, who's going to? I'm the seventh guy today to tell that story, So that was what I learned there, was about things I learned about the industry I didn't know. Like, oh, okay. And then the irony, of course, is we we stretched and clawed back from distribution, got people to come to the winery, and then COVID hits. So now we can't have people come to the winery, right? So that was, I mean, it wasn't catastrophic. We were 2,000 case product, it wasn't like, but it didn't, probably took a while to I don't know what happened, but yeah, that's that story.
So landing next at Naked Wines and being an internal educator, such an interesting position. You talk about taking people with a skill set and teaching them wine, enough wine that they can use their skill set to sell it. What did you find what did people need to know? What were people who were not wine familiar or necessarily interested, what did they glob onto that helped them do their jobs well?
I think the first like elemental thing was like, what do the words mean? Like, oh, Chardonnay is a grape. So that's the level, and then the regions, like regions matter. Why if we have we're bringing in producers from from Europe, and like, well, why is, so I remember there was a marketing thing. We had a Chateauneuf du Pape and we had a Lirac. Maybe a Chateauneuf du Pape and like a generic Côte de Rhôme. And the marketing pitch was like, well, this wine is, just down the street from other wineries whose wines sell for, 3 times as much. And they were talking about generic Côte de Rhône and Chateauneuf du Pape. Like, you can't say that. Well, why can't we say that? Well, here's why. And then that piece of like, there are these other, it's it's not like, you just can't, getting the, if not the specifics, just the idea that, especially because it's a foreign concept, right? No pun intended, that there's a reason that the wines from just down the street are 3 times as expensive, as that's a exponentially better place to grow grapes. The grapes are consistently, and I mean for hundreds of years, of higher quality. There's a reputation based on that. That name means something. It's like buying, I struggled to find an analogy, but getting that point across of like, you can't tell people, oh, it's just as good as this, because it's not just as good. There's a whole, the whole economy, the whole governmental, legislated, codified system that is based on the fact that these things. So that from a marketing perspective, communicating that to people, and then kind of an offshoot of that was not wanting to. It was almost like a translator, like, okay, we want to talk about these wines on the website. We want to offer descriptions of these wines. But we don't use wine words. We don't want to use. So really having to think about that, like, yeah, you know what? People, you start saying high acidity, low acidity. Like, to us in the wine business, like, that's just a thing. It's not good or bad. It's just, but if you're just getting into wine, you don't want to add, like, what is that? Acid. Yeah. So working with the copywriting team and the label team and saying, okay, well, here's how we would describe this wine as wine people. What are some other words we can use to communicate that? What is the takeaway? When you taste a high acid wine, what does that mean, right? Well, it's refreshing, it's crisp, it's, so coming up with these ways of like being authentic and accurate in the description, not just saying every wine's, getting away from superlatives. Not every wine is like, this is the best, this is the thisest. Getting away from that, being like, okay, we're going to talk about these wines and we're going to describe them in a way that matches what they actually are, but we're going to do it in a way that is not off-putting. Doesn't. Because that's another thing. Then it's always been kind of a pet peeve of mine, and I rally against this. Is this idea of wine language? That's the fortress wall that the wine people get behind. And they're like, no, you can't speak the language. You can't come in here and drink the wine with us, right? And that's not how it should be, right? So getting the chance to kind of, in a meaningful way, kind of poke holes in that wall, punch that wall down. So those are the main things from like a marketing perspective. And then from a business side, for people like the web dev people, coming up with ways to build a better search engine, how to like take whatever the portfolio was, a couple hundred wines, maybe 1,000, and group them in ways that made sense and that were relatable and also was searchable in an accurate search tool. And then of course the Netflix model of like, well, you like this wine? Coming up with this, I don't know what it's called, but like, here's the wine. If you like this, here's, it's like a, yeah, it's an algorithm, but it's almost like a flow chart, like, you know. So developing that to help them, you know, and make the site more navigable and more effective to help people find things. And then from an overall business perspective, in working with and interacting with winemakers, production, like this is what goes into it. This is what happens in a vintage. This is what could affect yield. This is what could affect quality, not in terms of good, bad quality, but like quality in terms of characteristics. And building out the range and differentiation. Like, okay, well, if you're going to have, we think our target number of Chardonnays is 20. Okay, well, here are the styles of Chardonnay. We can't just have 20 of the same Chardonnay, right? So it was like that, you know, looping in the business side of it in terms of having a comprehensive and profitable and diverse enough portfolio of products that you can't just like adjust the dials on the machine and crank out, right? Okay, well, if we want to add this wine of this style, here's the region we want to target. Here's the winemakers we want to talk to. Here's what they're going to ask. Here's the questions they're going to ask. And then also, like, this isn't going to show up tomorrow. Like, we have to be thinking 18 months, 24 months down the road, and converting people to that, right? Because you come from, like I said, you're casting a net to get people, you know, the best MBAs, the best CEOs and CFOs and people involved, and they're coming from the retail sector, but they're coming from a retail sector where it's a product, you know, and that was the key piece of their business model. Was this isn't just tank farm stuff that we're slapping our label on. This is actually made by actual winemakers, and so if you want to adhere to that and be true to that, here are the challenges and here's how we face them.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't just like teaching wine 101 classes. It was being in these meetings and having to be like, I don't say the voice of reason, but the voice of like, can we do that? You know? And it wasn't just me. And we had a team of people. They built a wine team of people that were knowledgeable about everything I'm talking about. So I was part of that. I contributed as part of that team. Well, that wasn't me, just like the Wizard of Oz, you know?
Just yelling into the wind.
Yeah. Just like, go behind the curtain and ask Trevor.
So obviously, you're at Linfield now, and kind of talked about how you got here and sort of starting kind of as the team we have in place was all starting. Tell me about the work you've done here and about kind of what is to be done. What is on your kind of a horizon as you look ahead?
Yeah. So the connection here, I think, was originally made through the CEO at the time of Naked. He's good buddies with Tim, and so when Naked went through, it's like a broken record, but the COVID thing with the winery, and then Naked went through a restructure. And to be fair, like we had talked about it from the beginning, like there's the heavy lifting, getting this thing set up, the education piece, and then there's like the maintenance piece. And so we kind of like had already said, when we get to the maintenance, we start to approach the maintenance phase, we may have to have a conversation because how sustainable is it? So we were kind of at that point in the conversation, and it made sense to restructure to where I'd be more of a consultant and just kind of keep things rolling. And so the CEO at the time said, "Hey, do you know what's going on at Linfield? Do you know Tim?" And I said, "No." So he made the introduction, and we started talking, and that was Stephanie Mitchell was running. You know Stephanie, and she was running it kind of as a side, as part of her overall responsibilities as an instructor and this and that. And so Tim, he's like, I don't really know. He's like, you got some great experience at WSET, because part of the job at Naked was to set up a WSET internal provider. So we were offering levels 1 and 2, well, just level 2 actually, we were teaching that internally. So people that were in consumer-facing positions, so customer service, wine advising team, marketing people, anyone that really like had their hands on the wine, got through. We did like a proprietary intro class, and then those folks and management across the board all went through level 2. So I had set all that up for them. So I was familiar with WSET and running a provider and everything else. So Tim put me then with Stephanie and said, well, okay, let's just see what we don't have a job. We have something. And so it's Dr. Stephanie, and she's like, yeah, she could really use an assistant, use some help, and was also very helpful to have someone that knew. She could just say, call WSET, or we need this, we need that, and I knew what that meant. She had to like train me up on WSET, and then have me. I could be of use immediately. And I said I was still, probably 3/4 time at Naked, transitioning that, so it was a perfect fit to come in and fill that role and help her with what she was doing. And then she and her husband moved back to the Bay Area. Would have been like July of 24, is that right? Yeah. Right. And so when she decided she was leaving, she said she wanted to put my name out there for taking over the WSET program, and also with Maria incoming and Tim leaving, she wanted to propose that it was a full-time position. She said it's just way too much work it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to get any better with someone doing it, a quarter time with all these other responsibilities. So she then, she pitched that to Maria, and Maria and I talked, and that's how that came to be. Because I said, again, the timing lined up where I could kind of really pull back from what I was doing with Naked. I'd gotten them in a good spot, and then transitioned to this. And it's funny, Maria mentioned this in our meeting just today, because she wasn't convinced that she thought it was a distraction. Why are we doing WSET? And the answer to that initially was that when Greg was setting things up, Greg Jones, thank you, he saw the need to graduate students with an academic degree and then also a professional certification, just to improve job. So that's why they initially brought WSET in as a program, and then realized they could also open it to the public and maybe generate some revenue that way. So that's kind of the origin of WSET here. And anyway, so when Maria and I talked, she did a good job, but she was like, I could tell there was some like, what exactly is the point of this? And when I told her, two things that still hold true and are kind of my guiding principles, is that it's the tip of the spear, right? Is that we have a really extraordinary program here. It's a unique program as far as educating people on wine business. And so any opportunity to build awareness, like we're one of very few programs in the country that offer this. And so just getting Linfield and the Center for Wine Education's name in front of people, just promoting the existence of the program. WSET has a way broader net to cast for that, and it doesn't cost you anything. You're actually making money while you do it, right? So everything that goes out, and I told Maria this, and it's still the case, everything that we do, social media, anything, any kind of marketing collateral is Linfield branded. This is not a separate thing. This is part of Linfield. And so it's getting that name out there in front of people. So that's important. And again, at very little cost, versus like a full-blown, to get that kind of reach, you'd have to pay a lot more than. And then the other piece of it is that the mandate, really, when you look at it, the mandate that created the Center for Wine Education was to create something that was a resource for wine education for the Valley, first of all, but Oregon in general, and I think the Northwest wine industry at large. This is the place that people come to get educated about wine. Well, WSET is the most impactful, dynamic, low-cost, light lift for people in the industry and in the community to become educated about wine. It's at the very least, it's a 6-hour, one day 6-hour class, right? So like, if anything, it meets that mandate, whether it's whatever else it does in the context of the program. This is what this is what the center was designed to do. So I feel like it accomplishes both of those things. And so the conversation I had with Maria when I came on, it's like that's what those two kind of parallel goals are what is going to guide me in this, and not just making it better as it exists, but expanding it, and bigger picture of that second mandate is that I think, from what I know about the industry in general, and specifically to, like, say, Oregon and California, and let's throw Walla Walla in there as well, is the industry here has a chance to differentiate itself through education, through making that impression to consumers, because people, I hear a lot, people go to, say, Napa, let's pick on them, and they spend a lot of money and they go to tastings and they learn nothing. Like they told us what the wine was and maybe a little bit about this, but we spent a week in wine country. We don't know anything more about wine than we did when we got here, right? And that people are not happy about that. Some people don't care, but consumers these days, they want, the education is part of it. They expect that in anything. So Oregon has a chance, because they have a story to tell, because there's something to educate people about. Why is it all Pinot? Let's start there, right? I went wine tasting in Oregon. I went to 6 wineries. I tasted 25 Pinot Noirs. Like, okay, were they all different? Well, yeah, okay. Why were they different? I don't know. Like, that right there. That's the marketing. That's the piece. Is like, we are blessed to have, like Burgundy, for example, to have this incredibly compelling grape that's capable of infinite variations and nuances. And so that's what we do. It's a great fit. Everything else we do, the AVAs, the split string of AVAs, the more specific AVAs that we keep developing, all based on the fact that this is the grape we grow and this is what it's capable of doing. Maybe we should tell the consumer that. Maybe we should give the consumer, like, okay, here's the prep. Read this before you go to wine tasting. Here's what to expect. It's going to be all Pinot. Here's why. Here's what you look for. Just that. Like, hand that out at the airport to people, right? So all these things is to say, like, we have a chance to build that reputation. Like, I went wine tasting in Oregon, and every place I went, I learned something about wine. I learned something about that winery, that vineyard, the grape, whatever. Like, that can make us stand apart in this country as a region. And so that's what's, that's the thing that's driving me on the second part of the mandate, is to be the resource for that, to convince, to make that point to wineries, and to provide that for them, to provide that opportunity for people in the industry, in the trade, whether they're salespeople, working in a retail, restaurant, winery, whatever. Is like, that's the bigger picture. That's an awesome goal, is to be the driving force behind making that happen for this region. So that's kind of the way I see my WSET, and then my place in that is to pursue that goal.
And you've already obviously expanded. Yeah. So tell me about the kind of the successes so far. Yeah. So we were obviously teaching here on campus, and we've since added satellite locations. So it's us, it's our brand, we're driving it, administering it, but we are teaching classes at Chemeketa Community College in Eola, because that's a huge, Central Valley, Salem, that's probably the second most populous city in the state. Either Salem or Eugene, it goes back and forth.
Okay, so but Salem and Eugene, right, 2/3 of the population centers, just far enough to not make sense for people to drive to McMinnville. So putting it closer to those centers, not just the trade, the Central and Southern Valley, or Southern Willamette wineries, and they have a viticulture enology program there, and they recognize, just like Greg did 8 years ago, that graduating kids with a degree and a certification would set them apart, and that's kind of the trend in community colleges, apparently, according to the dean. So we're now integrating WSET levels 1 and 2 into their 2-year degree program. So kids take two classes that are already requirements, and the instructors include the WSET curriculum with the class curriculum, and at the end they take the test and they get both. So we're holding classes there, and then we're also doing that, which is great. We teach classes in Hood River, same thing, just far enough to be inconvenient for folks to drive here, certainly, or even Portland. And there, the trade, the hospitality industry has picked up on it a little bit faster than the wineries. But that's, never going to be a huge thing for us. But it's, again, it's part of the wine industry in Oregon, and we're trying to lift that up. So that's important. And then Walla Walla. So there hasn't been a provider for WSET in Eastern Washington ever. And I was contacted by a woman that owns a wine bar there and teaches some classes on the side, who's extremely qualified. And she said, how do we do this? And I said, okay, we'll figure this out. And the proof is, of the 3 satellite locations, we've booked not sold out, but well booked every class we've had there since we started in the summer of last year. Because there's demand from the consumers, there's demand from the industry, and all we had to do was unlock the door and turn the lights on, and people showed up for it. So that's been a huge success. Probably hold pat this year. We've had inquiries from Bend and from Yakima, from community colleges there, to kind of, because the community colleges, they all kind of talk. So that's probably the next two places. And again, feeding not just the mandate for the industry and the community, but also getting the Linfield brand in front of people at community college. Say, hey, you've done that, now come here. Maybe do the master's program, do something, do a conference, do a workshop. So, yeah.
Let's look ahead a little bit for you. Anything else on your horizon you're excited about? Anything you haven't done that you want to do? Anything that's kind of in your mind right now?
Well, professionally, like I said, I think we have the team in place and the timing is right to really, really make good on this idea of getting Linfield, elevating Linfield beyond sort of regional recognition, and getting it to be nationally recognized, where people say, where should I go to school to learn about wine? Where can I go take a class? Where can I get a certificate? So anything I can do from my position to drive that is exciting. And like I said, I think we've got the people and the will to do that. So, and then, yeah, for me, professionally and personally, just like I said, this is all the education space. That's something I've been wanting to do. I've been fortunate enough to kind of move into it through WSET, but just exploring other avenues of education. As the program here grows, again, just finding ways to give back, to contribute my experience and my knowledge and everything else in ways that help other people, improve other people, and then just continue to educate myself. So I've got to finish the diploma, the WSET diploma, which I should get to this year. I keep putting it off. But then the MW beyond that would be kind of cool. Just to, again, it's kind of like what I talked about with what grad school wasn't, right? It's like, there's things I find interesting. Diploma is allowing me to dig deeper into those things, and then MW is like even more specific, more like driving. And then it's also like, when you become an MW, you become the wine guy. You become the person sort of the authority of sorts, or at least like the shaman, of sorts, because you're never really an authority on wine. It's just too big. But you become like the nexus of people that, like, okay, I want to learn about wine. Who should I ask? I ask that person. It's a sign of being on the path, on the journey, right? And so it's more. I see it more than that, more like that than I do like arriving and being like, that's it. I'm good. I know everything there's to know. You want answers, you come to me. It's more like just signaling to other people, like, this is a person who's dedicated themselves to this, and if you want, they're also in a position to help you get there.
You talked about that earlier in the interview, and I was going to come back to it. So I'm glad you brought it back up. The idea of a lack of mastery or a lack of finish line. Yeah. I'm curious for you personally, in your kind of journey, but also as you're educating other people in wine, how do you kind of come to terms with that and be okay with no finish line? And how do you sort of communicate that to the people you're educating about wine?
Yeah, I can't imagine it being any other way, honestly, like coming to terms with it. It doesn't bother me at all that there's no finish line. I don't think there's a finish line. I think if you think there's a finish line, you're mistaken in any field. Any of the sciences, right? That was some of the most passionate debates I've had with people. Unfortunately, it was kind of around COVID and vaccines and whatnot, but this idea that, well, science is always wrong. Yeah, that's yes. Yeah, well, they thought this, and then I'm yeah, they, whatever, you know what I mean? That's the whole point, is it answers the question, but then asks more questions, and it's an evolving thing. So there isn't, I don't think in any field, I can't think of off the top of my head any field where there is a finite, oh, that's it, I've learned everything there's to learn, there's nothing more nothing's going to change, it's going to stay the same. So coming from that sort of understanding of the world, it doesn't bother me that there's, it would surprise me if there was, a finish line in wine, and so it doesn't, and that's maybe part of the appeal as well of studying anything, is that if you like this, you get to keep doing it, because you're never gonna, there's always gonna be something more for you to study. So that's satisfying in itself. And how do I present that? I'm very transparent about it. Every class I teach, one of the first things I say is, I'm gonna learn something today. And I expect to learn something today. So you better ask questions. You better, I don't care how out of left field you think it is, how irrelevant you think it is, ask questions, because every class I teach, someone asks a question I can't answer. And so that will encourage me, and I said I will answer it. I'll go figure it out, and we'll at the break or overnight or whatever. So I tell people that, listen, this is a journey. Not something too woo-woo. We're all on the path. I'm here. You're here. It's the same path, and you. I wasn't born here, right? At one point I was right where you're at, and at one point you're going to be where I am. And so let's just, this is not a race. It's just we started at different times. And I think I hope people respond to that, and I say that, first of all, because it's true, which is important, but also because I think wine, I don't think people share it. The general perception I think people have of wine is not that. I think people think they're experts, and I think people are intimidated by the experts, and I think people think they have to be an expert, and they don't want to insult the expert by asking questions, and I think that, if I'm being totally truthful, I think that's cultivated by people in the industry, by people maybe in my position, in your position, other positions, and people cultivate that as a manifestation of just general human nature, and I think that sucks. I'll be straightforward about it. I could use stronger language, but I think that's limiting to the person themselves, and also to the people that could be helped by that. But it's propagated by the industry. It's propagated by publications. It's propagated by publications in magazines. 90% of the books that are written about wine reinforce this. 90% of the educational experiences, 90%, a lot of the educational experiences you expect to have are taught by experts who put themselves on an unquestionable pedestal that you can't, interact with. And I think that's what keeps. Jesus, how far do we want to go? The industry is in an adjustment period right now. By some metrics, is in a dip, not a decline. It's in a dip. It's in an adjustment period, and people are just in the industry well, why is that? Well, try being nice to people. You know what I mean? Try not being a dick when someone asks you a question. Try not building a wall on yourself that you, whether you're a winery or a wine professional or a wine critic or a wine writer, try just making it accessible. It's not hard, and you can still make it. People, people want to tell you, oh, it's people, and this is also a conceit. Oh, it's wine for dummies. Wine's easy. Here's wine. If you like a wine, it's good wine. That's all you need to know. No, wine's hard. It's hard. It's mysterious. It's difficult. It requires some critical thought. It requires you to learn some stuff. It requires you to memorize. I tell people in my class all the time. Well, how do we you learn it? How do you learn anything else? You freaking learn it. There's no shortcut for it. It is hard. It should be hard. It's satisfying. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Doesn't mean everyone can't do it, right? People do hard stuff all the time. But the fact that you don't know it or don't want to do it does not make you a bad person. right? Simple as that. I harped on this before. For me, there's an intellectual pleasure I get from wine. I can drink a wine, I may not like the way it tastes, but I'm like, oh, this is what happens when okay, cool, this is what this country is, this is what this region is about. You don't need all that. You put the wine in your mouth and you like the way it tastes, and that's it. That's totally fine. There are other levels to get to. If you don't want to get to those levels, that's fine. It doesn't make you don't need to be embarrassed by that, right? And that's the thing is people get embarrassed if they can't have those conversations, don't seek that intellectual pleasure, but not in other things, right? People eat friggin' mac and cheese, people drink, light beer unapologetically. So like why should, and those things are all, you could make elevated mac and cheese, you could make super complex crazy beers and geek out on that. But if you don't want to, people are fine with that. But people are not fine with that when it comes to wine. So, anything I'm ranting now, I'll stop.
It's a pretty fantastic way to end this, actually. So, there's all the questions that I have for you today. Anything that I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover?
I don't think so, man.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today. Thank you for your contributions to Linfield so far and being a great colleague. And we're going to let you off the hook.